Welcome, brave souls, to another chilling night in the twisted realm of shadows. Tonight's story will make you nervous of noises in the dark. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and let the haunting tales begin. I wasn't raised in the most comfortable household. My parents were in perpetual chaos, a result of what I later found out was heavy drug use. Around the age of 15, I took long walks in the evenings after school to get away from my dysfunctional home. This was around 2003. My life back then focused on 3 hobbies. One was learning how to play guitar. I brought it over to my friend Dan's house and we jammed our version of heavy metal. The second was going to the movie theatre to watch the latest horror film. The third was spending time outdoors taking long strolls. I blasted music through my iPod and wandered the woodland near my home. It was near the end of May, and leftover frost from winter on the trunks had evaporated. The trails were viable to walk on again, and the fragrance of the pines seemed to fuel me more than a cup of coffee. The sun started to lower, and it was then I saw a tilted sign with faded lettering. I walked past it. A rusted chain-link fence circled a space that was at least 1.5 miles wide. It was a theme park. There were roller coaster rails built stories high. Chunks were missing from it, as though a giant had cut out pieces of it with a gargantuan knife. At the ground level sat many buildings. Some consisted of a fun house with a chipped wooden exterior. Concession stands with advertisements depicting cartoon figures from the 1920s lined the area. The one sign that seemed fresh on the property was a stern warning with the words, "No trespassing." I noticed one consistency in all the structures. Open tents, target practice circles, balloon races, and fun slides had noticeable graffiti. The paint glowed in the darkening landscape. I heard the sound of boots crunching on leaves to my immediate left. I turned in that direction and didn't see anyone. Still, I ran away, unsure if it was a security guard or a crazy drifter. The next day, I told my best friend Dan about what I'd seen. We'd formed a sort of 2-piece band in those days, even though we couldn't have been sloppier in sound if we tried. As I described what I encountered in his garage, he finished tuning his bass. "You're lying," he said. "No, I swear." He looked at me and his eyes widened. He leaned back and squinted, as though he was trying to gauge my level of seriousness. "Show me." We hopped in his father's 97 Plymouth Breeze and drove to a local clearing. It took us to the same spot I visited the day before. The hike to the theme park was quiet and serene. When we got there, I could have sworn that the earth had reclaimed parts of it since I saw it last. "This place looks old," Dan said as he took in the surroundings. "How come we've never heard of it before?" "Tourism was heavier in this town before we were born," I said. "The owner may have lost so much money they couldn't demolish or renovate here. They need to reopen this and make it an airsoft field or something," Dan said as he kicked a rock against the fence. "We should go in." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "What if they have someone overlooking the area?" "Someone trailed me yesterday. Might have been a night watchman." "We're faster than some fat guy who sits around all day watching Jerry Springer in a guard shack," Dan said. "You're not chickening out on me, are you?" I wouldn't tolerate perception as a coward by a peer. "No," I said as I scaled the fence. Luckily, there was no barbed wire at the top. I plummeted to the other side. Dan followed, and we traversed along a path with all the empty stands. One of the booths had the word hypnotist written on the front in bold lettering. Another offered psychic services. We found a small stage set up with all the weight sets, a strongman show at one time in history. We lifted one of the dumbbells out of curiosity. It was fake, a prop, no less than a few ounces in heaviness, used to fool the audience. The Ferris wheel was easy to mistake for another decrepit building, since half of it was missing. What remained stood as twisted and mangled metal. I didn't see any lights on it, which made me believe the wiring to illuminate it was torn out a long time ago. On the outside barrier of the bumper car arena, were 2 words painted in graffiti. They read, "Follow here." An arrow pointing west sat below them. "There's another one," Dan said. He pointed to a stand lined with old prizes. Stuffed animals with exposed insides faced us. Their cotton innards spilled out and swayed with the wind. On the shelves was another painted direction, an arrow. We came to a mutual and unspoken agreement to follow the directions. We had to see where the instructional pointers would take us. We came to a drain pipe with the words, "Feed him," which had another arrow that led to the edge of the perimeter. The spot we found looked to be a mine or a cave opening. "It looks dark," I said. "Don't be a wuss," Dan said as he slapped me on the back. "I'll go first to make you feel better, wimp." We walked 30 feet in. There were no stalagmites. It didn't feel as though nature had designed it. I slipped on something wet. When I hit the ground, the ceiling collapsed and blocked the opening we'd walked through. Something snarled in the darkness. A set of crimson eyes made of fire gazed at us 15 feet away. The luminescence of its stare highlighted viscous tendrils of saliva. A sharp set of fangs revealed itself. A sense of terror filled my body. "Grab a rock," Dan said as he crouched to get a hold of one. I followed suit and fumbled around in the darkness for a heavy and jagged piece of stone. I settled on one which was 2 times bigger than my hand. We saw the set of eyes and the dangerous teeth move towards us. My heart pounded in my chest. Sweat beaded my forehead. "Now," Dan said. He hoisted the rock above his head and slammed it down in the centre between the set of red and orange eyes. The creature, whether it was a wolf, mountain lion or bear, staggered back for a few seconds. Then it lunged. Dan unleashed a shriek of pain. It was unusual to hear him release such a blood-curdling cry. I sprinted behind the thing, leaped onto its back, and slammed my rock down onto the topmost part of its skull. The feel of the impact was twofold. At first, it was crunchy, as though I was trying to break a hard block of wood. The second was squishy, as it pierced through brain matter. The animal let loose a whimper, which almost made me feel guilty. It staggered away. With our nemesis in flight mode, I grabbed Dan's hand and heaved him onto my shoulders. "Let's go back to the entrance," I said. "I'm going to need your help moving that rubble aside. There's no point in us going even deeper and hoping for some kind of way out." We passed the creature again, and it made its way back towards us. We threw rocks at it. The thing sprinted deeper into that infernal place of coldness and blackness. We scraped and lifted our way out of there. It felt like forever until we reached the trail. Halfway to the vehicle, Dan grimaced with each step. When we got to the car, he was in no condition to drive. I drove him to the hospital 5 miles away, and I ran every red light. Dan had to have stitches, and he was there for 6 hours or so before he went home. He had to tell a fabricated tale to his parents about how it was a rough skateboarding accident. Although Dan was unable to walk for a significant period, he still had dreams of being a rock star one day, so we maintained a diligent rehearsal routine. One evening after a horrendous session, Dan told me he wanted me to see something. He slipped a hand under his chair and pulled out a hardcover book. It was dusty, and the title was illegible underneath the grime built over the decades. "This volume is all about the travelling circuses," he said. "There's a brief chapter where they cover this county. A ringleader named Tex Sarah found a consistent audience here. He decided to take a permanent residency in this town. It's horrifying how he treated animals at that time. They got shocked and whipped. Those descriptions make me want to become a vegetarian." I nodded and stared at the thick stack of pages between the covers. "Back in the day, there was no such thing as the Animal Welfare Act," Dan said, as he opened the tome. "The place we visited was more like a theme park. It was a circus that was later converted to be family-friendly fairgrounds. The book has a description of a gigantic wolf Tex kept as his main attraction. No one could explain the size of the beast. It's written off as a folk tale. There were so many witness accounts that historians are a bit baffled. There were no black and white photos taken at the time. All we have are primitive drawings. Take a look. I gazed at the sketch in the middle of the book. Eyes identical to the ones we had seen were on the page. A giant wolf who lived longer than most human beings, residing in a cave on the outskirts of my town. Didn't make sense. Not to me. I believed that what we encountered that day was some kind of vicious animal. We should feel lucky we weren't hurt far worse. Whenever I hike near that area, I hear growls in the distance.